The Pinnacle Tower Grand Ballroom sat 42 floors above the city. On a clear night like this one, you could see the whole grid of it from those floor-to-ceiling windows. Every light burning, every avenue running its straight course to the edge of the horizon. The entire map of a world that Elijah Hargrove had convinced himself he had built alone. The room smelled like money and imported flowers and the particular kind of confidence that only lives in spaces where the wrong people have been celebrated for too long. Crystal chandeliers threw their light across white linen tables. The bar was open. The cameras were rolling. 200 people in black tie filled the space between the windows and the stage, holding their glasses, watching the man at the microphone the way people watch someone they believe can change their financial lives. Which is to say, they watched him the way people watch a god. With hope, with deference, and without nearly enough skepticism. Elijah Hargrove was a tall man, broad-shouldered. He had the kind of face that photographed well from every angle, and he had always known it. He had the voice of a man who had never been told no by anyone whose opinion he respected. Smooth and warm and carrying, always, just a hint of amusement, as if the world existed primarily to give him something to be pleased about. He wore his tuxedo the way powerful men wear power, like it was simply the natural state of things, and any other arrangement would be a deviation from reality. He had been speaking for 11 minutes. He had thanked the board, each member by name, with the practiced warmth of a man who understands that gratitude, deployed correctly, is just another form of control. He had thanked the investors. He had thanked his executive team. He had smiled at the applause after each name, letting it swell just long enough before moving on, conducting the room the way he conducted everything, with complete and quiet certainty that it would follow wherever he led. Then he gestured toward the woman at table 12, near the back, away from the cameras, at the edge of the room where people sit when they are on their way out, and everyone can see it. His voice shifted when he spoke about her. Not harsh exactly, but thinner. The way a man's voice gets when he is talking about something he has already moved past. He called her a liability the company had absorbed long enough. He said it with a smile still on his face. He said it the way a man says something he has been saying privately for months and is only now giving himself permission to say in front of witnesses, because he has decided that the witnesses no longer matter. He told her to go find something useful to do with her hands. The room did not gasp. Several people laughed softly, the kind of laugh that is really a reflex, a way of agreeing without having to commit to the agreement. That was the most brutal part, not the cruelty itself, but the room's willingness to fold around it like it was nothing unusual. Diane Washington Hargrove did not flinch. She did not look up. She reached for the black satin clutch on the table beside her water glass, lifted it with one hand, and set it back down. Slowly, precisely, the way you set down something you intend to pick back up. She smoothed the front of her deep burgundy dress. She looked at nothing, and no one in particular, which was exactly the expression of a woman who has already won and is simply waiting for the room to understand what has already happened. 3 chairs to her left. Her cousin Renee laughed first. Not the nervous laugh of someone caught off guard, but a practiced laugh. The laugh of someone who has been rehearsing this specific moment in private for longer than she would ever admit to anyone. Across the room, near the audiovisual booth tucked into the back right corner, a woman in a gray blazer lowered her coffee cup to the table and checked, with 2 fingers, the USB drive in her jacket pocket. At table 2, near the front, a man named Elder Raymond Whitfield did not laugh, did not stir, did not look at Elijah at all. He looked at Diane, then he set down his glass. She had been carrying that document for 6 days. The question was never whether she would use it. The question had always been when. 12 years before that night, the building that housed the accounting office on Fairview Street had not yet been torn down. It stood 3 stories on the corner, nothing distinguished about its exterior. Brick, narrow windows, a directory by the door with names nobody outside that block would have recognized. The third floor had no elevator and fluorescent lights that flickered in winter. But in the fall, they burned steady, and the office was warm enough on late October afternoons when the city outside had already turned cold. Diane Washington was 29 years old. She was the only woman on the floor. She had proven 3 of the men in adjacent offices wrong about their own numbers that week alone, and she had done it without announcing that she was doing it, which was a skill she had developed early and would spend years being grateful for. The yellow legal pad on her desk was something she had bought herself, a thick one, the kind with the green-tinted lines. Her handwriting covered the first 12 pages: projections, margin analysis, cost structures, risk modeling for a startup that everyone in that building, save Diane herself, believed would be underwater before its second fiscal year. She had run the numbers 4 times. She trusted them. Elijah Hargrove walked into the office late on a Tuesday afternoon with coffee in one hand and the particular energy of a man who has never once questioned whether he belongs in a room. He sat in the empty chair beside her desk without asking. He looked at the legal pad. He studied the numbers for a moment. He did not say they were impressive. He was smarter than that. He asked one question, and the question was the right one. "Where did you find that margin?" she told him. He wrote it on the back of his own notepad, tore the page off, folded it, and put it in his jacket pocket like he was storing something valuable. That night, from a number she did not yet recognize, he called her. He said he had never watched anyone think about risk the way she did. He said that if she was willing to work with him, they could build something that would outlast both of them and mean something when it was gone. He said her name with a particular kind of attention that made it feel like he had been saving it. She believed all of it. That was where it began. Not with a lie exactly, but with a truth so selective, it functioned as one. The yellow legal pad moved with her into the marriage. Through the courtship and the proposal and the first apartment, and then the house on Ardmore Court. It sat on whatever surface was nearest to her work. When they set up the shared home office in the first year, she placed it on the bookshelf on her side of the room. Elijah kept it there. He told her it was because he wanted to remember where they had started together. She believed that too, for longer than she should have. 2 years into the marriage, at a dinner at the Meridian Club with 4 investors who had written checks specifically because of a risk analysis Diane had prepared, Elijah introduced her to the table as my wife. Not Diane, not the co-founder, not the woman who had written the analysis sitting in the folder that one of those investors was tapping with 2 fingers while he waited for the appetizers. "Just my wife," said the way a man says it when he wants people to admire something without looking at it too closely. She reached for her water glass. She took one slow sip and set it back down without making a sound. She looked at the man across from her and smiled at something he said about the market. She let it go. That was the first crack, and she knew it was a crack. And she chose to walk around it the way you walk around a crack in a floor, carefully, and without admitting to anyone, including yourself, that you are afraid of what is underneath. What she saw that night at the Meridian Club, she did not fully name until much later. By then, it would not matter. She had already begun. The 18 months before the gala moved slowly at first, and then all at once. The way betrayal always moves. The way a thing that has been true for a long time becomes visible only when someone stops looking away. Elijah had begun meeting with a private attorney, not the company's attorney, not anyone connected to the firm they had built together, but a man in an office across town whose practice specialized in the particular architecture of making one person's contributions disappear from a record while keeping their consequences intact. The restructuring of Hargrove Capital's ownership documents happened in language so technical and so buried in addenda and amendments that understanding it required not just legal training, but the specific foreknowledge of what you were looking for. He was reclassifying Diane's foundational contributions. 12 years of strategy, relationship building, financial architecture, and the kind of institutional memory that does not show up on a balance sheet but runs through everything, into a category labeled spousal support services. He was writing her out of the story one clause at a time, with the patience and confidence of a man who had never in his life been held accountable for anything he had done with a pen. 8 months before the gala, Vanessa Cole arrived. Elijah introduced her to the board as a strategic advisor. She had credentials and a firm handshake, and the kind of composed energy that fills a room without appearing to try. She moved through the company's spaces the way she moved through every space, as if she had already decided they belonged to her and was simply waiting for everyone else to arrive at the same conclusion. She had been in Elijah's private calendar for 14 months before her official introduction to the board. Within 6 weeks, she had presented a written report to the full board, single-spaced, sourced, formatted with the appearance of rigorous research, concluding that Diane Hargrove represented an emotional and reputational liability to the company's investor relationships. The sourcing was invisible because it was fictional, assembled from language taken somewhere it should never have been taken. The board received it, filed it. Not one of them thought to ask Diane about it. Not one. And then there was Renee, the cousin, the woman in the third photograph from the left at the wedding, the woman who had sat with Diane through the 2 worst years of her life and been given access to the particular kind of detail that only blood is supposed to carry. Renee had come to visit in the spring, and during that visit, while Diane was in the kitchen making coffee, she had photographed the therapy intake forms that had been sitting on the desk in the home office. The office Diane did not yet know she was about to lose. She had sent the photographs to Vanessa Cole within 24 hours. She had told herself she was being practical. She had told herself that Elijah would take care of her when it was over. She had told herself that loyalty to the family's financial future was a more sophisticated form of loyalty than the kind that required you to stay on someone's side when staying was inconvenient. She had arranged these thoughts into something she could live with, and she had lived with it, right up until the moment at the gala when she pushed her chair back and walked toward the exit with her champagne glass still in her hand and her eyes on the floor. The almost breaking came on a Thursday in November, alone in the kitchen at 11 at night. Elijah was traveling, or said he was, which by then Diane had stopped treating as the same statement. The house was very quiet, the kind of quiet that is not peaceful but pressurized, the kind that sits in rooms where something has not yet been said. The yellow legal pad was on the kitchen counter. Elijah had pulled it from the bookshelf during one of his office reorganizations and left it there, not from sentiment, just from the small carelessness of a man who no longer considered other people's objects worth attending to. Diane picked it up. She read the first page in her own handwriting, the margin she had found, the number that had built the first floor of everything. She set it back down on the counter and looked at it for a long moment, not moving. She did not cry. What she did instead was open her laptop and sit down at the kitchen island and begin reading, not looking for anything specific yet, but looking because something in her had shifted from the long patience of hoping things would change to the quieter, more deliberate work of understanding exactly what had already been done. She did not close the laptop until 3 in the morning. When she finally did, she sat in the silence for another few minutes with the screen dark, and then she went to bed, and she did not mention it to anyone. The manila envelope fell from behind the stuck filing cabinet drawer on a Tuesday in October. Diane had not been searching for it, which is important, because finding something you were not looking for carries a different kind of weight than finding something you were. She had been cleaning the home office on Elijah's instruction, clearing it out to convert into a guest room, and the drawer had been stuck for 2 years. She had been meaning to deal with it for most of that time. She finally worked it free, pulled it all the way out, and leaned it against the wall to clean the space behind it. The envelope dropped from wherever it had been wedged behind the back panel It fell to the floor without drama, landed flat, and lay there. She picked it up. She turned it over. She opened it. Inside was a photocopy of the original Hargrove Capital founding agreement. The real version. The version from 12 years ago, before the private attorney across town had been hired, before the language had been adjusted, before her name had been moved from the top of the document to the absence of the document. In this version, clean, notarized, dated, real, Diane Washington's name appeared as co-founder and equity partner. 40% stake. Her name in bold at the top of the first page, the way names appear on founding documents when the person who wrote the strategy and modeled the risk and sourced the first capital is someone the other founder has not yet decided to erase. She read the page twice. She folded it along its original crease, the fold that had kept it flat in the envelope for however many years it had spent behind that drawer, surviving in the dark while everything above it was being rearranged. She placed it inside the black satin clutch on the shelf above the desk, the one she had bought for the gala, the one she had not yet worn. Then she picked up the box she had been packing and carried it to the hallway and set it by the door for donation. Then she went back into the office and kept cleaning. She did not call anyone that night. She did not call anyone the next morning. She sat with what she knew for 4 more days before she made a single phone call, and the person she called was not an attorney. She called Elder Raymond Whitfield on a Wednesday morning, just after 9. She had known him for 12 years. He had been the one, at a church fundraiser on a warm October night, who had introduced her and Elijah across a table near a window. He had watched the marriage from a respectful distance and watched what Elijah had become with a concerned one. He was a man who had spent 22 years as a federal judge and understood better than most that the difference between justice and injustice is almost never a matter of what happened, but of who controls the record of what happened. He sat on the State Bar Oversight Committee. He held a board seat at the Regional Federal Credit Union, where Hargrove Capital's founding loans had originated. When Diane called him, she said she needed the name of a good attorney. He listened to her for 4 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "Don't get an attorney yet. Come see me first." She went on Friday morning. She brought the envelope, the retired administrative assistant who had notarized every original Hargrove Capital document, lived in a small house in the east part of the city. She was 71 years old and had kept personal copies of every document she had ever notarized for 40 years, organized by year in labeled binders on a shelf in her spare bedroom, because she had always believed that the record was the most important thing and that someone had to be responsible for keeping it honest. She spread the relevant documents on her kitchen table and pointed to the discrepancy with the steadiness of a woman who had seen enough in 40 years to know exactly what she was looking at. The notary stamp on the amended version of the founding agreement was not her stamp. The impression was wrong. The registration number was wrong. She had not signed that document. Someone else had, using a forged impression of her seal. She said this plainly, without drama, the way people state things that are simply and completely true. Elder Whitfield connected Diane with Brother Ansel, a forensic accountant who had been a member of Greater Calvary Church for 30 years and who read financial documents with the patience and precision of a man who understood that the truth in a balance sheet is almost never on the surface. Brother Ansel traced Hargrove Capital's original angel investment, $2.3 million, the money that had made everything else possible, back through several layers of documentation to a loan taken against a property Diane had inherited from her grandmother before the marriage. Her grandmother had paid it off in 1987 and left it to Diane in a handwritten will. Elijah had used it as collateral. He had walked Diane through the signing with the calm authority of a man explaining a formality. She had signed because she trusted him. He had taken her grandmother's house and used it to build himself an empire. And then he had spent 12 years removing her name from every wall of it while the foundation underneath remained, permanently and inarguably, hers. Brother Ansel said. He knew what he was doing from the first document. He had always known. The paralegal at Vanessa Cole's consulting firm had not been comfortable for months. She had recognized Diane's name in the internal files in September. She had read the report. She had read the underlying source material, the notes that had been used to construct a professional assessment of someone's mental and emotional stability. And she had recognized immediately that the material should not exist in a consulting firm's possession. It was specific in the way that only private clinical disclosure is specific. It carried the language and the detail and the particular intimacy of things said in a room where you believe no one else is listening. She reached out through a mutual contact to Elder Whitfield's attorney in October. She came with documentation, internal communications, file timestamps, the chain of receipt showing exactly when the material had entered Vanessa's files and through what channel. Renee's name was on the chain. The stolen therapy notes were traceable to a specific home visit on a specific date in the spring. The false report was constructed from material that had been obtained through a violation of medical privacy law and then presented to a corporate board as legitimate professional analysis. Every element of it was documentable. The paralegal had documented all of it. Brother Ansel found the last piece when he compared the original loan documents, pulled from the Federal Credit Union's archives through Elder Whitfield's board seat, against Hargrove Capital's SEC filings from 4 years prior, when the company had gone public. The loan against Diane's inherited property was a founding liability of the company. It predated the company's public offering. In a public offering, every material liability must be disclosed. This one had been omitted, not overlooked, not forgotten. Omitted. $2.3 million of founding liability, invisible in the public record, while 200 shareholders made investment decisions based on a picture of the company that had been deliberately made incomplete. It was securities fraud. It was federal. And it meant that every single person in that ballroom on the night of the gala was, in a legal sense that would soon become very real, a victim of the man at the microphone. Elder Whitfield's attorney assembled everything into a single folder over 3 weeks. She was meticulous and unhurried, which is the particular quality of a lawyer who knows she has enough and is making absolutely certain she has more. She printed one clean copy of the original founding agreement, Diane's name in bold at the top, 40% equity partner, the real document, the true one, and handed it to Diane on a Tuesday afternoon. Diane placed it inside the black satin clutch. She did not open the clutch again until the night of the gala. What she had been waiting for, sitting at table 12 with her water glass and her stillness, was not an opportunity. It was a specific moment. She had known for 6 weeks what that moment would look like. She had simply been waiting for Elijah to provide it, and he had. He always did. That was his fatal blind spot. He could not conceive of a version of the story in which she was a participant rather than a backdrop. He had never once asked himself what she knew. He had never thought to wonder. The night before the gala, Elijah sent a text to Vanessa's personal phone. She is going to be at table 12. Last time. He sent it from a shared cloud account he had set up 9 months into the marriage and forgotten existed. Diane had not forgotten. He arrived with the confidence of a man who has already written the ending. He had told his private attorney that Diane would receive divorce papers within the week. He had selected her seat himself. Table 12, back corner, edge of the room, away from the cameras. He moved through the room the way he always moved, as if everyone else was simply furniture placed there for his navigation. He did not look at table 12 until he reached the stage. When he did, he saw exactly what he expected. A woman in a burgundy dress, sitting alone, hands in her lap, already finished. Vanessa arrived early and sat at the head table. She had told 3 board members that a leadership transition was imminent at Hargrove Capital, framing it as concern, dressing it in the language of institutional stability. She was wearing a dress she had ordered the same week she submitted the false report, and she believed the evening belonged to her. She did not know that the evening had already been arranged. At table 2, Elder Raymond Whitfield arrived 45 minutes before the first guest. He sat with Brother Ansel to his left. He straightened his tie once, precisely, and did not touch it again. Near the audiovisual booth in the back right corner, Elder Whitfield's attorney stood with her folder and her USB drive and a cup of coffee she had bought in the lobby and carried upstairs without drinking. She stood with the particular stillness of someone who is ready and has been ready and is simply waiting for the appointed moment to arrive. The three of them did not exchange glances across the room. They did not need to. Everything had been arranged. Everything was in position. The only person in that room who did not know what was about to happen was the man on the stage who believed he was running it. Diane sat at table 12. She ordered water. She spoke to no one. She looked at nothing in particular. Her clutch sat on the white linen beside her plate, small, black, perfectly still. To every eye in that room that noticed her at all, she looked like a woman who had already accepted what was coming, which is the very thing a woman who has already arranged what is coming needs everyone to believe. She had been counting on that. The most dangerous position in any room is the one nobody is watching. Everyone in that room would remember exactly where they were standing when it happened. That is the thing about moments of real consequence. They burn themselves into the memory of everyone present, and no one who was there that night would ever fully agree on which detail to put first when they told the story later. Some would say it was the screens. Some would say it was Brother Ansel's voice. Some would say it was the sound of the microphone when Elijah set it down. But all of them, every single one, would mention the stillness of the woman in the burgundy dress. Elijah took the microphone at 9:17. He thanked the board. He thanked the investors. He spoke about Hargrove Capital's record quarter with the easy fluency of a man who has rehearsed something so many times it no longer sounds rehearsed, which is different from something true. He spoke about vision. He spoke about legacy. He used the word built 11 times in 8 minutes, always in the first person singular, always with the weight of a man who had convinced himself that the word described only him, that the foundation under everything he was describing was simply the ground, and that the ground belonged to whoever was standing on it. That was his fatal blind spot. He had confused the record with the truth for so long that the distinction had stopped existing for him. He genuinely believed that erasing her name from the founding document had erased her from the foundation itself. He believed that. Right up until the moment the screens changed. When he gestured toward table 12 and called her a liability, he was still smiling. When Renee laughed, he did not look at her. When Diane smoothed her dress and set down her clutch, he had already looked away. The dismissal complete. The moment filed. The story continuing as he had written it. He did not see her stand. He did not see her walk. Not toward the kitchen, not toward the exit, but straight back through the room toward the audio-visual booth in the far corner. Moving with the unhurried deliberateness of a woman who has known exactly where she is going for 6 weeks and has simply been waiting for permission to begin. She reached the woman in the gray blazer. She did not speak. She gave one nod. The ballroom screens went white. Then the original Hargrove Capital founding agreement appeared. Enlarged, sharp, every word clear from every seat in the room. Diane Washington, co-founder and equity partner, 40% stake. On the left side of the screen. On the right side, the amended version. The blank space where her name had been. The notary discrepancy outlined in a clean red box that made it impossible to look at anything else. The room did not gasp. The room went silent. There is a difference between those two things. A gasp is the sound surprise makes. Silence is the sound of 200 people understanding something at the same time. Brother Ansel stood at table 2. He did not raise his hand, or wait to be recognized. He simply stood and spoke in the calm and specific voice of a man who has spent 30 years making numbers plain. He named the loan. He named the amount. He named the property and the family that had owned it for 2 generations before it became collateral for someone else's ambition. He named the SEC filing year. He named the omission. He spoke for 90 seconds. He sat down. Elder Whitfield did not stand. He sat with his hands folded on the tablecloth in front of him, very still, the way a man is still when he has already done everything that needed doing and is simply present while the world catches up. Elijah's face moved through stages, and every stage was quieter than the last, and the quiet made it worse. First came the smile, automatic, reflexive, the smile of a man who has managed every difficult moment by appearing to be above it. He looked toward his communications director, who was staring at the screen. He looked for Vanessa. Vanessa was bent over her phone with both thumbs moving, which is the posture of a person trying urgently to reach someone who is not going to answer. He looked for Renee. Renee had already stood. Her champagne glass was still in her hand, and her eyes were on the carpet, and she was moving toward the far edge of the room with the deliberate casualness of a person who needs very much not to appear to be running. She did not look back. A board member in the front row opened his jacket, removed his phone, looked at it for 3 seconds, and walked to the far corner of the room with it pressed to his ear. He did not return to his seat. 2 others at the same table exchanged a look that did not require words. Elijah's hands were still holding the microphone. He looked at the screen. He looked at the room. He set the microphone down on the podium. It made a sound when it landed. Hollow, amplified, the sound of a period placed at the end of a sentence that has been a long time coming. The whole room heard it. Elder Whitfield's attorney stepped forward from the audiovisual booth and carried a single document to the board chair's table. She set it in front of him without speaking. It was the paralegal's signed statement. Renee's name, Vanessa's name, the stolen therapy notes, the false report, the chain of custody from a home visit in the spring to a board presentation the following fall. The board chair read it once. He read it again. He looked up across the room at Vanessa Cole, who had stopped looking at her phone and was watching him. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at the document. He did not look at Elijah. Before anyone spoke, before a single voice rose in that room, there were 11 full seconds of silence. The city glittered 42 floors below. The chandeliers held their light. Diane stood near the audiovisual booth with her hands at her sides, still, the stillest person in the room, wearing the burgundy dress she had worn the night she and Elijah had signed the original founding agreement, the one that had always named her, the one that had been true from the beginning and was simply, finally, visible. I have never seen a woman stand that still in a room that loud, not once in my life, and I hope I carry that image until the day I go. The SEC opened a preliminary inquiry 72 hours after the gala. 3 board members submitted formal resignations within the week, each letter worded with the particular care of people who need the record to reflect that they acted promptly once the facts were before them. The law firm that had drafted and filed the amended founding document sent a notice of termination of representation by certified mail on a Monday morning. Elijah's name was removed from the building lobby directory 14 days after the gala, not by any court order, but by board vote. The vote was not close. Vanessa Cole left the ballroom before the elevator arrived. By the following morning, her consulting firm's website was offline, not suspended, not archived, simply gone. 2 client termination letters arrived by end of business that day. She did not contact Elijah after the night of the gala. She had understood, in the moment the board chair looked at her across that room, what she had been in this story. She had been useful. And useful is not the same thing as protected. Renee sent a voice note 3 weeks later. 11 minutes and 22 seconds. She started with context and moved through justification and arrived, somewhere around the 9-minute mark, at something that was shaped like an apology without being one. The kind of words that are designed to make the speaker feel better without requiring anything of the listener. Diane listened to the first 40 seconds. She set her phone face down on the kitchen counter. She walked out onto the porch of her grandmother's house and stood there looking at the yard until the light changed. And then she went back inside and made herself a cup of tea and did not mention the voice note to anyone. 2 of Elijah's cousins who had laughed at the gala sent formal written apologies through Elder Whitfield's office because they understood correctly that sending them directly would require Diane to receive them directly, and they had enough self-awareness left to know they had not yet earned that access. Elder Whitfield placed both letters in a folder and told Diane they existed. She did not request them. She did not read them. She left them with him. Diane's attorney was a woman who had been practicing corporate and family law for 27 years and had never raised her voice in a deposition because she had never needed to. She was precise and patient and thorough, and when she described the settlement terms, she used the language of what was owed rather than what could be won, which is an important distinction and one that took 4 months to make real. The 40% equity stake, the value of the inherited property used as collateral, with interest calculated from the date of the original loan. 12 years of strategic contribution, finally correctly categorized. The number was not a small one. The settlement was not the end. It was the beginning of the correct accounting. Near the elevator on the night of the gala, as the room was beginning to empty and the chandeliers still held their light over the wreckage of someone else's certainty, a young woman approached Diane. She was early 30s, a junior shareholder, still holding her program from the evening. She had never met Diane. She did not pretend they were connected by anything other than the fact of having been present in the same room when the truth finally came in and took up its rightful space. She did not say, "I'm sorry," she said. "I've been watching you hold it together all night. I just want you to know, we all saw it." Diane looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. The city was 42 floors below, every light still burning. The house on her grandmother's street sat on a corner lot with a kitchen window that faced east. Her grandmother had bought it in 1962, the second year she and Diane's grandfather had lived in the city. With a down payment they had saved for 4 years by refusing to spend money on anything they did not absolutely need. It was a small house. It had a kitchen where the light came through the east window every Saturday morning at an angle that turned the room warm. The counters, the table, the worn floor that had been swept by the same hands for decades, carrying the particular quiet of spaces that have been loved for a long time by people who understood what love required of them. The yellow legal pad was on the table, not Elijah's copy. That one was in a folder in an attorney's office, part of a record that would outlast any version of the story he had tried to tell about himself. This was the original. Elder Whitfield had arranged during the discovery process for it to be located in a storage box and returned to Diane without ceremony, placed on her kitchen table one morning while she was in the other room, as if it had simply found its way home. She came into the kitchen and saw it there. She sat down. She turned the cover back. Her handwriting on the first 12 pages, the margins she had found, the numbers she had trusted, the foundation of everything.
2 weeks after the settlement closed, Greater Calvary Church held its annual Women's Sunday. Elder Whitfield called Diane on the Thursday before to ask if she would come. Not to speak, he said, not to perform or testify or stand before anyone, just to sit in the front row in the place reserved for women the congregation had chosen to honor because she had earned that place and they wanted her to know they knew it. She said she would come. She wore the burgundy dress. She came in through the double doors at the back of the sanctuary. The church was full, the way Greater Calvary is always full on Women's Sunday, every pew occupied. The air warm with the specific warmth of a room where people have gathered not out of obligation, but out of something older and more deliberate than that. She had taken 3 steps down the center aisle when the congregation rose. They rose without signal, without announcement, without a word from the pulpit. The women first, and then the men, and then the children following their parents the way children do when they understand that something real and important is happening, even before they have words for what it is. Diane stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the aisle in her burgundy dress, and the light through the stained glass fell across her in broken pieces of color, amber, blue, and the particular deep red that is almost the color of her dress, almost the exact shade she had worn the night she decided to stop waiting and start moving. She stood there for a moment, still, the stillest person in the room. Then she kept walking. She walked all the way to the front row, and she sat down, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she looked at the cross above the pulpit, and the room slowly, gently sat back down around her. On a Saturday morning in spring, Diane sat at her grandmother's kitchen table. The legal pad was open in front of her. She had turned past the first 12 pages, past her handwriting, past the margins, past the numbers that had built a foundation someone else had put his name on. She had found the first blank page. She picked up the pen from the table beside her coffee cup. She felt the weight of it in her hand, the familiar slight resistance of a good pen that has been used, and she pressed the tip to the clean white page. She wrote one number at the top, just one, the beginning of something she had not yet given a name. She looked at it for a moment, then she kept writing. She was starting again, and this time her name would be on everything. The pen moved across the page, and outside the light was just beginning. If this story stayed with you, hit that like button. Share this with a woman who is still carrying something the world hasn't seen yet. Subscribe, because every week we come back to the same truth.